My name is John Lyons. I'm from San Francisco, California. The date is April 23rd.
Yep.
I got that right this time, 2006. I'm here with my uncle Tom Lyons in New Braunfels, Texas.
Correct.
And we're looking forward to finding the German bakery afterwards to get some kolaches. So let's begin.
I'm afraid the bakery is closed on Sundays.
Oh, well, you know what? We can adjust and maybe get them flown into San Francisco.
We can send you some.
That would be perfect. So, Tom, this is how the interview will go. To begin with, why don't you tell me your full name and your date of birth?
My name is Thomas Anthony Lyons, and I was
Speak up a little
born
bit.
in May 26th of, I'm told, of 1936.
And was there some doubt about the date, or?
No.
Oh, there's not.
Angela happened to be there that day.
That's right. We just heard that story when Bob was in San Francisco. He found that out from her. He was told that story again.
I don't remember that, but that's what she told me.
Now, is there anyone in your family, was there an uncle or a relative named Thomas that you were named after that you know of?
I don't know if I was named after him, but there was an Uncle Tom who was my dad's brother.
Okay.
Who's since passed. He was a farmer in Delmont, South Dakota.
And was that far from Yankton?
About 60 miles, and I believe that was the old homestead where my dad grew up, I think.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. What number are you?
I'm number 5.
So that means Jack before and Bob and...
It was Pat, Frank, your dad, Jean, Jack, myself, and Bob and Susan.
Bob and Susan. Do you know how old your parents were when you were born?
They would have been, my mother would have been 37 or 38. I think she was born in 98, maybe 99. My dad was born a year later.
Do you know if were you born on the farm or you were born in the hospital in town?
I was born at home.
You were born at home. Okay, and that's Angela had come out as...
Angela was visiting there. She was a nurse, or maybe she was in nurse's training from Omaha.
So it was just a coincidence.
I believe it was a coincidence that she was there.
Interesting. So, were there any pets that you had that you remember specifically that were yours growing up?
I don't think anybody had any pets. That was their ownership. We had a dog that I remember named Kilroy, who was there in the 40s. And prior to that, I think there was a German Shepherd that my mother had.
Okay. And then there were the cows and the
And then
pigs.
there was the cows and the pigs, and I don't think we named any of them.
Okay.
And there was numerous cats.
No, I'm sure there were.
Some indoor, some outdoor.
Oh, you actually had indoor cats at the time too.
We had 1 or 2.
So when you were born, there were still horses being run on the farm?
There were. I remember my dad had 4 horses.
Do you remember their names?
One of them was named Pete, I think. I think we called one Dava, I'm not sure. And I don't remember the other 2. So
as you grew up on the farm, there were more tractors brought into the farm, or was that something much later that came?
There was all the farming was done with with horses until 1941, I believe. I think in 1941 my dad bought an International Harvester Model H, which my brother Pat still has.
Which we've all driven.
And that was a godsend. It changed our life, that tractor.
What was it used primarily for? It wasn't to pull a plow through the field though, was it? Or?
Oh yes, it was. It was used for field machinery. Prior to that time, it was all done with horses. I believe there was some tractors on the farm. Prior to that, I don't remember them that were used for running belt-driven equipment like grinders and buzz saws, things like that.
Right. So education-wise, did you go to the schoolhouse at all, or
I went to the school, Willowdale School. It was right next door to our farmhouse. I was there for 5 years through the 5th grade.
Okay.
And then at the 6th grade and later, then we went to town to go to Catholic elementary school, which was called Sacred Heart School. That was an 8th grade school.
So when you were going to town, was that because Pat was old enough to drive then, or was he going to high school at that time?
I don't believe that he took us to school. I don't remember how we got to school.
Okay.
Because Pat was working. He worked early mornings for the local dairy.
Oh, okay.
I forget the name of the dairy now. So he was gone by the time we get up.
Right.
And
So
he worked there when he was in high school.
So, and then the schoolhouse closed at that point, is that right?
No, the schoolhouse went many, many years later.
Really?
And I don't remember when it was closed. I would guess it would have been in the 70s. You'd have to ask Pat. I don't recall.
Huh. So I know that at an earlier time, sometimes the school teacher lived in the back room at the farm.
I don't remember that, but many of the years when we were there, the school teacher that was there was living in our house, rented a room from my mother.
Huh. That's crazy.
Upstairs. I think she had 2 rooms upstairs. I believe she cooked up there. Lonesome life, I imagine.
Yeah, maybe. So at that time, do you remember kind of the mix of what was going on the farm? Was it, I know that some of the earlier boys had said that it was kind of a cashless society that they lived in, where the butter and eggs went to town and bartered out for other things, and there might have been some money left afterwards, but was mostly what was produced on the farm what you consumed, or do you remember how that went down?
Most of it was consumed. What bought the groceries probably all the time was eggs and cream. They sold eggs and sold cream. And then they raised hogs, some, not a lot, and they were sold for money. And then there was cattle that were raised they were bought as calves and they were raised and sold.
So they were beef cattle, but you also had dairy cattle. Some.
We had a few cows that nobody liked much, but they gave milk.
Yeah, and the chickens.
And then we processed the milk there every day to get the cream, and then the cream was sold.
Bob said that he was in charge of cleaning out the chicken coop every Saturday, and he thought it was a bad job. Is that true, or?
It is, but he didn't do it alone. I was there to help him.
That's what I thought.
And that was a thankless task. And then later, some of the older kids left, like Pat and Gene and Frank, and then we moved up from the chicken house to the barn so we could milk the cows.
That was nice. So bigger things to clean up.
Bigger
after.
things.
Well,
I remember when Gene left, I was really not happy about that because that was more cows to milk for me.
It's just not.
My dad said, "He's gone. Just do it."
Didn't have much input in there, did you?
No.
Doesn't seem like you guys really probably had much chance to
didn't have any
be
choice.
independent. Well, that leads kind of into my next comment or question is about house rules. I know, I had the opportunity to know your mother, my grandmother, Mary, for many years, but I never knew your dad. He died, I think, a year before I was born.
1960.
2 years before I was born. So do you recall just generally, any chores besides the general farming activities that you had? Were there activities you had to do in the house that your mom wanted you to help her with?
Well, those were done by somebody else. Susan, her name at that time was Betty, helped, and Jack did a lot of helping in the house. So some worked out, some worked inside.
And, one of the things that I've asked all the other boys too is that, education was obviously a high priority in your family, even for your mother, who I think had some college education, etc. Do you have any reason to know? Have you ever thought about why it was so important to them when maybe it wasn't in the neighborhood or in other families around the area?
I just assumed they thought it was really important. My mother probably drove most of that, I would think. Yeah. Although my dad was also encouraged it, but she's the one that spearheaded it, I think.
One of the things I did with everyone was I went through kind of a David Letterman top 10 list and asking questions, and you don't have time to think about this. You have to answer instantaneously, and no thought process goes into this. And it's kind of ranking the brothers. So just some real simple ones at first, and then we'll kind of get into the more difficult ones. So who do you think physically was the strongest brother? He could lift the most cow or pig at one time.
Oh, I presume Pat. I presume.
Okay. Who do you think was the funniest of the brothers? And you can answer yourself if you think you were the funniest of the brothers.
Well, when I was there, I think the funniest was, or probably the most humorous one probably was your dad.
My dad?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, we haven't gotten that one yet. Most serious. Who would have been the most serious brother? And you can say yourself if you...
I would think, I would say Gene,
Gene?
probably.
Okay. Was there a team leader among... Who do you think was the best leader in the group?
Team leader, I don't know that we actually didn't work in teams.
Well, or who do you think that you could tell that everyone was...
It might have been your dad.
Okay.
I would think.
Who was Mother's pet?
Mother's pet. I don't think she had any pets, but Bob was probably closer to her than anybody.
Mm-hmm. How about your dad? Did he have a quote-unquote pet?
Some said I was, but I don't know that I didn't.
Okay.
That was the case at the time.
Who do you think was the smartest?
Smartest. That's a good question.
And it doesn't have to be...
I don't know. Could have been Gene. Could have been Jack.
Okay. How about on kind of the more workings of the farm? Who's the best mechanic? I guess maybe there was more equipment later on, but was there anyone that stood out?
Well, Pat was good, and I was.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Pat was quite good.
Okay. How about with animals? Would that be anyone in particular?
I don't know.
Okay.
Could have been Pat.
Who?
But they weren't pets, you know.
Right. No. Understood. Who do you think got into trouble the most?
Who got in trouble the most? I don't know. Pat got in trouble a time or two. Bob got in trouble a time or two after I left home, I heard.
Was there anyone that you thought that could talk themselves out of trouble the best when they actually did get into trouble, maybe?
Probably Bob, I would think.
Do you, I guess one of the things I thought about is, were there any defining moments that you recall on the farm for yourself as a young boy or even a young man while you were still on the farm? Is there anything that stood out in your mind, any event or...
Oh, I'm not sure I could pinpoint one that was stood out that way. We got indoor plumbing, that was a big evening, I'll tell you that for sure.
Well, that's big.
And electricity.
When did you get electricity?
They had electricity in earlier times in the house. It was driven by a engine-driven generator, but I never remembered it running. I think it was called what was it called? It was DC power, but I think they stopped using that in the early 30s or mid 30s, probably due to the fact they didn't have enough money to run it. So it took diesel fuel to run it, or kerosene. It was in the basement. So we didn't have any electricity for maybe 8 or 9 years. And I think we got electricity around 1940. That was REA.
Right.
And then they wired the buildings and rewired the house to get that going. And that was a big deal.
And what do you...
Because then you could have a refrigerator.
Right.
Instead of an ice box. That was a big deal.
So how did you get the ice when you actually had the ice box? Do you remember that?
I do. They would go into town probably once a week and buy a block of ice. I don't know how big it was, maybe 50 pounds or more. And they would put the ice on the top of the front bumper. And you'd drive home with the ice in your bumper and you put the ice in the ice box.
Yeah.
Didn't keep the ice box real cold, but it was better than not having any.
No, I know that in my experience in Yankton, there was an establishment called the Ice House where...
That was the ice house. That was where the ice came from, and it's still there. I don't believe they run the ice making equipment anymore. They may have some ice makers there, but they're the newer kind.
It's mostly just to cool the beer.
Now they sell beer. I presume it's still there, and ice.
I think it is still
and
there.
You can drive up and order a beer, and they'll bring it to you right in your car.
Just like A&W.
Yep.
So, some thoughts about the holidays. Do you remember what a typical Christmas would be like at the Lyons farm?
Oh yeah, Christmas is a big time. Usually you went to midnight mass. Gifts were opened before you went to midnight mass. After supper in the evening before Christmas, you usually went to midnight mass, and then after midnight mass, Mother served oyster stew, and that was interesting.
Do you have any idea why or how she got the oysters, or?
Don't know. They were canned.
Okay.
Canned oysters.
Okay.
And it wasn't easy to make because it was easy. It was easy to burn the milk, which happened one time I remember. But I think we ate it anyway, and it was a big deal. And you had oyster crackers to go with it. Right. It was nice. And then we went to church again, as I remember. Usually then Christmas Day. So usually we'd go twice. And Bob and I were, when we were in elementary school, we were in the choir, so we usually sang in the choir at midnight mass.
Do you remember family around Christmas? Was it just the immediate family, or did you have aunts and uncles? And
then there was always a big dinner Christmas Day, and usually that was Ruth Donahoe and her husband Francis and their 3 kids usually would come, I think, for Christmas Day. I don't believe anybody else came. I don't think Mother's parents came for that. So that was a big meal, very large meal. Yeah. A lot of work.
And what was the role of your grandparents in any of this? So when you were growing up, your mom's parents were still alive, and were your dad's parents around too, or?
Mother's parents were, and when I remember them, they were living in town. They were retired, and they would come to visit. But I don't think there was a lot of meals back and forth between our family and their house. But there was a lot of communication. My grandfather Donnie, he died in around 45 or 46, I think. So he was gone. And then my grandmother lived to be 100. She died in 1957, I think.
It's that Lyons Donahoe gene pool that's going to keep us.
Pardon?
That Lyons Donahoe gene pool is going to keep us going for a long time.
Then my dad's parents, I didn't know them very well. They died in the 40s. They went bankrupt in the 30s and lost everything. And when I remembered them, my grandfather Lyons was living with Uncle Bob, and my grandmother was living with Aunt Mary and her husband Vince. They were in Rapid City. That's the last time I remember my grandmother Lyons. They were living in Rapid City. I think Uncle Vince was working for the Internal Revenue Service, I think. He lost his, Vince lost his job working for the IRS because he didn't have a high school education. They fired him. And as I remember the story, after they fired him and they got some new people in there, they hired him back for a short time to teach the kids that they hired how to do his job. It was not good to lose a job, but he did.
And then when they lost the farm in the 30s, do you remember, was that the Dust Bowl, or was that?
It was, yeah.
And I guess you probably
couldn't pay their taxes, so they lost it.
Yeah, I know Pat talked a little bit about the federal farm loan banks lending money pretty easily, and then
I don't think they did in that time. And Charles Mix County was where they had the farm, and it was a big county. Charles Mix is a big county, and I believe that all the farms but 3 went bankrupt. Everybody lost everything except 3 farms. I think 3 farms survived.
Well, maybe on a happier note, what was some of the general entertainment like at home when you were growing up? I mean, obviously without electricity, there probably wasn't a radio or things like that. But do you remember what you guys did to?
Played a lot of cards. In the 50s, we played canasta a lot. I think those were the only 2 games we played.
Did you boys play sports among yourselves, or was there?
We did not. Your dad Frank played football for a couple of years, and I believe that was the only. I believe he was the only one that went into sports at high school. The rest of us were working, it seems.
What were some of the things maybe you remember going into town for? You had a car when you were growing up, or did you have to hitch rides with the older brothers or friends?
Well, my folks went into town every Saturday evening in the summertime. Everybody went to town Saturday night. With them. They drove and we went with them. And Pat had a car when he drove a Model T. They bought inexpensively, and he drove it to high school. Although I think his first year in high school, he was taken to and from in a taxi. The people that lived, that had kids that were going to go to high school hired a little taxi, and the taxi came out every day and picked him up and brought him back home. And then I think by the time he was in sophomore, I don't know exactly when he got it, but at some point he got a Model T, drove it to and from.
Were you involved in 4-H, or was
we all were in 4-H, except I don't think Pat was in 4-H. I don't think there was a 4-H in existence probably when he was in high school.
He said that too.
But as soon as one became, in existence, then everybody participated, and most of it was, all of it probably was with cows or steers. We all had steers that we showed once a year at the 4-H show.
Yeah.
Don't believe we had any other animals.
Was that a big focus, through the year, or was that something that you...
That was a big deal because as I remember it, the steer was given to us. I don't know that we all had one. Maybe we shared, I don't know. But then they were sold when 4-H event was over every summer. Then that steer was sold, was auctioned off, and then I believe that was pretty much all the money we had to spend for a year. That's what we got from that.
So
and it was a lot of money in those times.
So was it a sad parting, or was it just business as usual?
Business as usual.
Understood. Do you remember any kind of live performances that either you were involved with? Was there, or that you went to town for? Was there live music? I know that there was a band supposedly on the farm. Is that right?
There was a band. Jack and I and Susan and Bob were in it. Jack organized it, and there was 3 or 4 neighbor kids that were involved in. It was a band, and we played at various events. We played at dances in the summertime.
And what did you play?
I played a clarinet. I didn't play very well. I played a clarinet. Bob played a trumpet. Susan played a clarinet. And Jack played the piano, accordion, and I don't remember the other instruments.
Was it all instrumental, or did someone sing?
I think that Bob sang some, I think. I don't remember anybody else singing, but it was mostly music. But he sang, as I remember.
Do you think, excuse me, do you think that, from your point of view, was there a greater influence to you, not maybe to the family in general, but to you from the Donahoe or the Lyons side of the family?
Oh, I don't know that I can answer that. There was an influence from both, because there was more Donahoes around than Lyons. I suppose there was quite more influence from the Donahoes. But there was a great deal of influence from my dad and my mother. They were quite good at influencing us.
Do you, excuse me, do you remember your first time away from home?
Well, the first time away from home would have been going to a 4-H camp, which was a few days trip. I don't remember where that camp was. It was in central South Dakota, and that was fun. 3 or 4 days maybe at the most.
Okay.
And then the next time away from home was to go away to college.
Well, there's a little bit of a story around that, isn't there? Or maybe I've heard it. Maybe you can tell me your side of the story about when you graduated from high school. You felt pretty clear that you were going to go work on the farm.
I had no idea what I was going to do.
Well, why don't you tell us?
But I knew I didn't want to go to college.
Right.
That was in the early summer. And my mother was very concerned about that. She voiced her concern about it a few times. And I don't remember what prompted me to change my mind. In August, I think, of that year, or that summer, I changed my mind and told my dad I'd changed my mind, and I don't remember who suggested it, but I think the next day we drove out to Rapid City. It was very late in the summer, and met with the, I forget what they called the guy, head of personnel or whatever, at the School of Mines. His name was Palmerton. We called him LERP.
Why did you call him?
Because his initials were LRP. And I'm pretty sure that the reason that we didn't have any trouble getting in at that late in the summer was because my brother Frank had gone there. And he remembered my brother.
Hmm.
Frank, who graduated in 52, I think. That was in 54 when we went out there.
Hmm.
So I started school, and I believe that, I don't think they turned anybody away out there that wanted to go there. Although I suppose there was a cutoff time when so late in the summer you couldn't get in. But I got in, but I think they took everybody that wanted to get in if they met the rules. They didn't turn anybody down. But you had to prove yourself the first quarter. If you didn't prove yourself, you were history.
Were you able to, do you feel as though your high school education allowed you to go into engineering school, or was it a pretty tough road to hoe for a while?
It was hard the first semester because I didn't do well in high school. Nobody demanded you to do well in high school, so some of us didn't, and I was one of them. So I had difficulty the first semester. We went by quarters. I had trouble the first quarter, but after that it was pretty much smooth sailing.
How do you know how you paid for college?
My dad paid for it. I don't know how he did it. I'm sure it was hard for him. Yeah. And then as soon as I could, I started working part-time. Not a lot. I worked part-time. I got a job at the college. I was doing janitorial work. Mm-hmm. And that was hard to get a job because so many people wanted it. I really think that the one reason I got it was because Frank had been there. And they knew him.
Right.
I presume. They never told me that. But I believe that's probably what happened there.
And so what was the curriculum like? What kind of a degree did you end up getting from that?
Mechanical engineering. We took a lot of hours. I think when I was a junior I took 23 hours. But it was always at least 18. And it didn't seem like a hardship. But nowadays I think that's a lot of hours to take. But they probably do more now. Any given hour of school, I suppose.
Did you come home very often?
Came home in the summer. Came home at Thanksgiving. Just had 3 or 4 days off Thanksgiving, and Christmas was usually 2 weeks, and then there was a spring break that I think was a week. So usually you went home for that, and then you went home for the summer. Time was 3 months. So.
How would you get back and forth? Did you have a car then, or were you taking the train?
Well, I always rode with somebody that we knew. There was a lot of kids that had cars. And I think the last year I did have a car when I was in college. But you didn't drive it much because you didn't have any money for gas. So.
So you graduated from college. What year was that?
Graduated in 58.
58. And was there still the draft? Did you go into the military, or was there?
No, I never did. Never did. There was a draft, but I escaped it. I really can't give you the reasons for that. But I went to work for DuPont in Orange, Texas when I got out of school. I didn't stay there long. I didn't like it. So I ended up a few months later going to work in Chicago for a company called York. Mm-hmm. And Chicago was near where you grew up. So I used to visit your dad and your mother when I was there.
How long did you live in Chicago?
I was only there about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then I went over to Philadelphia for a couple of years, and then I went down to Houston after that. I've been in Texas ever since.
Yeah. Well, from the Rock Island Lyons part of the family, was there also an episode where you were in a car accident?
I was in an accident in Chicago. I was driving a Renault, I think. They call it Renaults now. And there was a snowstorm one night, and I was driving down Toohey Avenue, and I was going real slow, but there was a bad storm and a lot of snow on the ground, and I tried to stop when a light turned red, and I slid into the side of a truck. So I put my head through the windshield, and so that's what the accident was all about.
Right. And did you spend some time then in Rock Island?
I went down to Rock Island after I got out of the hospital for a few days, and spent time there with, I think I stayed at your grandfather's house, I believe, for a few days. Then I went back to work.
Yeah. And so you said from Chicago to Philadelphia, and who?
With York.
With York, the same company.
And then in York, I was transferred to Houston with York. I stayed there about 5 years, and then went off to work in other areas. And
what type of work were you doing? Was it the same kind of?
Basically, I was doing refrigeration engineering, refrigeration work, which I've been doing all my life now.
Mm-hmm. And when did you leave York?
I left York in '67 and went to work for a guy that I knew in Houston. And I stayed there till '75, and then '75 I had a chance to move to San Antonio, so I took it, came over here, and been here ever since.
And how did you meet Marcia?
Marcia was working at, the company I went to work for was called Rico. And I met Marcia there. She came to work there. I have to tell you, I don't know what year that was. In the late 70s, I believe. I don't know, but Marcia knows what year it was. And then Marcia left there, and I was still there. And then around 1980 or 81, your dad and my mother and a host of others came to visit. And we had decided to have a party, invite some people I knew. And I invited Marcia and her friend Liz to come. Do you remember that? To the party. And they came. And we had a grand time, and then I started dating Marcia after that, and we got married in 1982. So that's how that happened.
Right. And now you live in New Braunfels.
I do.
And why did you leave San Antonio to move here, and what was...
Well, I left the company I was working for in New Braunfels. I decided to go to do something else, and I went to work for a guy in Louisiana. And that didn't pan out, so after a few months I became unemployed. First time ever. Jobs were hard to find. And I couldn't go back to the company I worked for in New Braunfels because they were having difficulties also. So Marcia and I ended up moving to Midland, Texas. And we stayed, that was in year 2000. We stayed there until late year 2001. And I was asked to come back to work in New Braunfels, and we took it. Didn't take much convincing because Marcia and I, especially Marcia, did not have any great love for West Texas.
I thought Midland was the garden spot of Texas.
Not hardly. No, Midland is just not a good place to live.
Yeah.
Unless you grew up there. Good place to work, but not a good place to live. The highlight of the weekend was to go to Walmart and dine out at McDonald's.
Well, that sounds like
when we took the chance. It's a nice town, nice people out there, but not a lot of activities. The nearest town of any consequence that has anything to do was probably New Braunfels. Maybe San Antonio.
That's great. So are there, now that we've kind of gone through a little bit of the overview and some recollections, are there any things that you have thought of in the conversation we've had that you maybe want to touch upon again with any of your memories?
No, I grew up on a farm, and we probably were poor, but we didn't know it. My dad and my mother knew it, I'm sure. And they were just great parents, and they did well in it. They taught everybody well how to get along. They didn't talk about a lot of things. I remember one time when I was probably in the 40s, we were making the weekly trip to town, and I think we were driving in my dad's Plymouth. I don't remember what car it was, but I remember. Marcia's heard this story before. I remember going to town, and there was a neighbor who was ahead of us in his car with his kids, and he was deathly. He was dirt poor. Everybody knew it, but nobody talked about it. And my neighbor was driving in his car, and he wasn't. I don't think he was going over 15 miles an hour because that's probably as fast as his car would go. And my dad was driving behind, and he did not pass the neighbor. He didn't say a word about it. He just didn't pass that guy. Everybody knew you just didn't pass your neighbor. That was many years ago, and I still remember that. And that was pretty much how he treated people.
It's a marvelous story, actually. Well, I can tell you that from my point of view, Yankton is, although it was a brief period of time for me, the people and the place and the things that I learned there were things that I still carry with me through my professional and personal life every day, too.
It was a great place to live. I didn't like the weather in the wintertime. Plus the fact that if you weren't going to get into agriculture, there wasn't a lot of opportunities. So most people that weren't going to get into agriculture or teaching or medical profession, ended up leaving the state and going to work in other places.
Well, I thought there was some talk that you know, maybe we're going to go work the farm too, or was that something that changed when you went to college?
Well, it changed when I went to college. I never thought that. I didn't know. I wasn't thinking too far in advance. But it ended up in the early 50s. My dad gave my brother Pat an opportunity to do it. I don't know exactly how that came to be, but he and my dad started working together, and although my dad probably never said it more than once or twice, he just said this is not a good way to make a living. I think I remember him telling me that. And I think what he meant was that Pat was doing it and it probably wasn't a place for two. I don't really know. But I think he encouraged us to do other things. He'd had a hard life farming because of so many ups and downs.
Do you think your dad was a good manager as well as a farmer? Do you think that he got what the business was about and just...
I think he was. He did well, you know, considering the hard times. He did well, and he didn't put everybody through college, but he helped everybody that needed help. I needed help. Gene probably did most of his on his own because he had been in the Coast Guard and had government assistance. Pat had government assistance when he didn't go to college for a couple of years, I don't think. I don't think Frank had any government assistance, so my dad did assisted him. Jack was pretty much self-sufficient. He joined the Army after a year or two of college, and then when he got out, he had a GI Bill, so he pretty much did his on his own, I think, financially. And I don't know about the others. I can't recall.
Well, so as an adult, I know that you at times would go back for Christmas, I think, to South Dakota. Is that right? Or how often do you think as an adult you actually went back?
Well, before I was married, I went back every Christmas, almost every Christmas. And a lot of times I go back in the summertime. And then after Marcia and I married, we went back quite often. When we went, it was always in the summertime, I think, when we went. And it was a good visits, good times. We had 2 children, and I know they enjoyed going to visit. They were always good hosts. And after my parents were gone, then Jack and Pat were certainly good hosts and made you feel right at home.
Yeah. Did Ann Donahoe always seemed to be a pretty big part of the family life too? Was she?
She was. She was always she was at all the events, and she contributed a lot to all the events, and I think she helped some financially with education. I don't know the details on that, but she was always helping people. I remember one time there was some event, I don't remember what it was, and Bob was going to come, but something happened where he couldn't come. I don't know if the planes got canceled or what, I don't remember. So she chartered an airplane, a small plane, to go pick him up somewhere and bring him to the event.
That's a great story.
I don't even know that she told anyone she did it, but everybody knew it.
Right. Said without. Wow.
I think Ann's goal was to die broke. She always seemed to have money to take care of whatever needed taken care of, and I really think she pretty much gave almost everything away before she died. That's the way she wanted it.
Yeah. Seemed to be very generous when I was around her.
Yeah, and Mother pretty much did the same thing too.
Yeah.
She knew it was coming, she just didn't know exactly when.
Yeah.
But I remember her saying to me, shortly before she went, she was ready to go, and it wasn't very much longer that she was gone. So,
all comes to an end, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Mother was 93, I think, when she passed, and Ann was, I think Ann died in, God, I can't remember, in the 80s, and I think she was 90, I believe, when she passed away.
So she was older than your mom,
right?
So.
Yeah.
And do you know how your father? I mean, I know your dad died of cancer. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know the details on it, what it was, but I know Jack and Margaret got married in 1960, June or July. He was ill then, and I didn't realize that what the circumstances were. I think others knew it. Maybe I knew it and forgot it. But He was at the wedding, and it was in Iowa, Royal, Iowa, I think. And he was dead. I think maybe it was August they got married. He was dead. He died in October, two months later.
And do you recall how long your mom lived on the farm? I mean, she was living. They were living on the farm at the time, weren't they?
They were, and it was just my dad and my mother, and that was in October. And in December, she just couldn't stand living there alone. So she decided to move into town in December, or she decided in December. I don't know when she moved. She moved in with Ann, because Ann had a house in town, and then I believe Pat and Pearl moved right away after that down to the farm. They were living up on a small farm that my Aunt Ruth owned, across from the cemetery. Tiny little house. And I believe they had 4 or 5 kids living in that little bitty house. They had 2 itty bitty bedrooms and an itty bitty living room and an itty bitty kitchen. How they did it, I don't know. So I'm sure they were glad to get down to that farm when the chance came. That was a big house on the farm. Had 5 or 6 bedrooms, living room, dining room, a porch you could eat on, and a big kitchen, and indoor plumbing.
And who was your roommate when you were growing up? Do you remember? Younger boys?
Well, early on it would have been Bob and I had bunk beds, and Jack and Jean probably were in that room too. They had a double bed. And then later I roomed with Frank for a while when he was in high school and I was in grade school. And I don't remember after that how that went. I remember the room that Frank and I had was a room that Pat had before he went away. And I remember he had a little machine that rolled cigarettes in that room when he was in high school. It upset my mother to no end because she didn't think you should be smoking, even though she smoked. Cigarettes were hard to get, and that was during the war, so he rolled his own. I don't know what happened to that machine. It'd be nice to have that one machine.
A little antique piece now.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's great.
I remember about it.
I appreciate the time, Tom.
Well, I appreciate your coming by and visiting. Now we're going to go over to the grist mill in the Braunfels and have dinner.
Excellent. Thank you.